The bullet shattered the window of the general store just as Rose Newman stepped inside, glass raining down around her shoulders like deadly snow. And she knew in that instant her carefully constructed life in Piñon, New Mexico, was about to change forever. It was October 1878, and the afternoon sun hung low over the dusty streets, casting long shadows that seemed to predict the violence to come. Rose had been reaching for a bag of flour when the gunfire erupted outside, men shouting and horses screaming in panic. She dropped to the floor behind the counter, her hands instinctively protecting her head as more shots rang out. The storekeeper, old Mr. Henderson, was already on the ground beside her, his face pale with terror. "Stay down," he hissed, though Rose had no intention of doing otherwise. The shooting seemed to last forever, but was probably only a minute or two. When silence finally fell, broken only by the nervous whinnying of horses and the groans of injured men, Rose slowly lifted her head. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she peered through the broken window to see what had happened. 3 men lay in the street, blood pooling beneath them in the dust. A group of riders was already disappearing down the main road, their horses kicking up clouds of dirt. And standing in the middle of it all, still holding his smoking revolver, was a tall cowboy she had never seen before. He wore a dusty brown hat, chaps over worn denim pants, and a dark shirt that had seen better days. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat brim, but she could see the set of his jaw, firm and determined. He holstered his weapon with practiced ease and walked toward the fallen men, checking each one in turn. Rose pushed herself to her feet, brushing glass from her dress. Her hands were shaking, not just from the shock of the violence but from exhaustion that had settled into her bones over the past 3 years. She looked down at those hands, calloused and rough from endless work, the nails broken and the skin raw in places. They were the hands of a woman who had learned to survive alone. Mr. Henderson stood up beside her, letting out a long breath. "That is Kieran Quinn," he said quietly. "Heard he was coming to town. Used to be a Texas Ranger, they say. Sheriff Thompson brought him in to help deal with the Dalton gang." Rose had heard of the Dalton gang. Everyone in New Mexico territory had. They had been terrorizing small towns for months, robbing banks and stores, killing anyone who got in their way. Piñon had been spared so far, but there had been talk that they were moving this direction. "Looks like they found us first," Rose murmured. She watched as the stranger, this Kieran Quinn, helped some of the townspeople who had emerged from their hiding places. The doctor hurried over to attend to one man who was still alive, though badly wounded. Kieran moved with the confidence of someone who had seen violence before and knew how to handle its aftermath. Rose turned away from the window. She needed to get home. Her small ranch was 2 miles outside of town, and she had livestock to tend to before nightfall. The flour would have to wait for another day when her nerves were not so frayed. She slipped out the back door of the general store, wanting to avoid the crowd gathering in the street. Her horse, a sturdy mare named Bess, was tied up behind the building where she had left her. Rose untied the reins with trembling fingers and pulled herself into the saddle, her muscles protesting. Every day was hard work from sunup to sundown, and she felt it in every part of her body. The ride home was usually peaceful, but today Rose could not stop thinking about the shooting. She had come to Piñon 3 years ago with her husband, Thomas Newman, full of hope and dreams. They had bought a small piece of land and started building their future together. But Thomas had died in a ranching accident 18 months later, kicked in the head by a spooked horse, and Rose had been left alone to run the ranch and make the mortgage payments to the bank. It had been the hardest 1.5 years of her life. She had learned to do everything herself: mend fences, break horses, tend cattle, fix the roof when it leaked. Her hands, which had once been soft and delicate, had transformed into something else entirely. They were rough now, scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who knew what real work meant. Some of the women in town whispered about her, said it was not proper for a woman to be running a ranch alone. They said she should sell the land and find a respectable job in town, or better yet, find another husband. But Rose was stubborn. Thomas had loved that land, had poured his heart into it, and she would not let it go without a fight. As she approached her property, she saw that the fence along the eastern pasture had broken again. 3 of her cattle had wandered through and were grazing on the wrong side. Rose closed her eyes and took a deep breath, pushing down the frustration that threatened to overwhelm her. She had fixed that fence just last week, but the wood was old and kept giving way. She dismounted and tied Bess to the fence post, then walked over to inspect the damage. It would take at least 2 hours to repair, and she still had to feed the animals, collect eggs from the chickens, and make herself something to eat. The sun would be down before she finished half of it. Rose knelt down and started pulling away the broken boards, splinters digging into her already damaged hands. She barely felt it anymore. Pain had become such a constant companion that she had learned to ignore it. She was so focused on her work that she did not hear the horse approaching until it was almost upon her. Rose jumped to her feet, her heart racing, and spun around to see a rider coming up the path to her ranch. It was the cowboy from town, Kieran Quinn. He reined in his horse a few feet away and tipped his hat to her. Up close, she could see his face more clearly. He had strong features, a square jaw with a few days' worth of stubble, and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was a hardness to him, the look of a man who had seen too much, but also something else she could not quite name. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and rough around the edges. "Saw you leave town in a hurry, wanted to make sure you got home safe." Rose bristled slightly. She did not need a man checking on her like she was some helpless creature. "I am fine, as you can see. Been taking care of myself for quite some time now." He nodded slowly, his gaze moving from her face to the broken fence and then back again. "I can see that. Looks like you have got your hands full here." "Nothing I cannot handle." She crossed her arms, very aware of how she must look. Her dress was old and patched in several places, covered in dust and straw. Her hair, which she had pinned up that morning, was falling loose around her face. She probably looked like a scarecrow. Kieran dismounted in one smooth motion and walked over to inspect the fence. "This wood is pretty worn out. You are going to keep having problems unless you replace the whole section." "I know that," Rose said, perhaps more sharply than she intended. "But I do not exactly have the money for new lumber right now." He looked at her for a long moment, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. She hated admitting weakness, hated that this stranger could see how she was struggling. "I could help you reinforce it," he offered. "Make it last a bit longer, at least." Rose wanted to refuse. Pride demanded that she send him away and handle it herself, as she had handled everything else. But the truth was she was exhausted, bone-tired in a way that sleep never seemed to fix. And if she was being honest with herself, she could use the help. "Why would you do that?" she asked suspiciously. Kieran shrugged, a ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Because I am here and you need the help. Do not make it more complicated than it is." After a moment's hesitation, Rose nodded. "All right. Thank you." They worked in silence for a while, Kieran showing her a technique for bracing the old wood with rope and additional support beams that would help it hold longer. He worked with the efficiency of someone who had done this kind of labor many times before. Rose tried not to stare at the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt. or the way his hands, large and capable, handled the wood with ease. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Kieran stood back to survey their work. That should hold for a good while, but you really should think about replacing it when you can. I will, Rose said quietly. Thank you for your help, I appreciate it. He nodded and started walking back to his horse, but then paused and turned around. I did not catch your name. Rose Newman. Kieran Quinn, he said, though she already knew that. You live out here alone, she stiffened slightly. I do. My husband died a year and a half ago. It is my land now. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes. I am sorry for your loss. That must be hard, running this place by yourself. I manage. She was not sure why she added the next part, but the words came out before she could stop them. Most days, anyway. Kieran walked back toward her, and for a moment she thought he might say something comforting or pitying. She braced herself for it, ready to deflect. But instead, he reached out and gently took one of her hands in his, turning it palm up to examine it in the fading light. His hands were rough too, calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. He traced one finger along the calluses on her palm, the raw spots and healing blisters, the scars from splinters and rope burns. These hands built character strong, he said softly, meeting her eyes. These are not hands to be ashamed of. These are the hands of someone who knows what it means to fight for something that matters. Rose felt something catch in her chest, emotion welling up so suddenly it took her by surprise. No one had said anything like that to her before. The townspeople either pitied her or criticized her. No one had looked at her rough, damaged hands and seen strength instead of failure. She pulled her hand back gently, blinking away the moisture in her eyes. I should get inside. Still have chores to finish. Kieran nodded and stepped back. I will be in town for a while, helping the sheriff with the gang situation. If you need anything, you can find me at the boarding house on Main Street. Thank you, Rose said again, and this time her voice was softer. She watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller against the darkening sky, and something in her chest felt different. Lighter, maybe, or perhaps just less alone. The next few days passed in their usual exhausting rhythm. Rose woke before dawn each morning, tended to the animals, worked on repairs around the property, and fell into bed each night too tired to dream. But she found herself thinking about Kieran Quinn more than she wanted to admit. The way he had looked at her hands, the words he had spoken. No one had made her feel valuable in a long time. On Thursday afternoon, she rode into town to visit the bank. Her mortgage payment was due, and she had barely scraped together enough money to cover it. She had sold 3 head of cattle the week before, but the price had been lower than she hoped. It seemed like every month was a struggle to make ends meet. The bank manager, Mr. Worthington, was a thin man with spectacles and a perpetually disapproving expression. He looked over her payment with pursed lips and then glanced up at her with barely concealed disdain. Mrs. Newman, this payment is adequate for this month, but I must remind you that you have been late 3 times in the past 6 months. The bank cannot continue to extend leniency indefinitely. Rose felt her cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment. I have never missed a payment, Mr. Worthington. Being a few days late is not the same as defaulting. Nevertheless, he continued in his nasally voice, the bank must consider its interests. If you continue to struggle with payments, we may have to consider foreclosure. The word hit her like a physical blow. Foreclosure meant losing everything. Losing the land Thomas had loved, the home they had built together, the future she had fought so hard to preserve. I will make my payments, she said through gritted teeth. You do not need to worry about that. She left the bank feeling shaken and angry. She was working herself to exhaustion every single day, barely sleeping, barely eating, and it still was not enough. What more could she possibly do? Lost in her thoughts, she nearly collided with someone on the wooden sidewalk. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. "Careful there," a familiar voice said. Rose looked up to find herself face to face with Kieran. He was clean-shaven now, and his clothes looked freshly washed. He smiled at her, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less hardened. "Sorry," she muttered. "I was not watching where I was going." His smile faded as he studied her face. "What is wrong?" "Nothing. Just had a frustrating meeting at the bank." She tried to move past him, but he gently caught her arm. "Have you eaten today?" The question surprised her. Rose opened her mouth to say yes, but realized she could not remember the last time she had sat down for a proper meal. "I have been busy." "Come on," Kieran said, gesturing toward the small restaurant across the street. "Let me buy you lunch." "I do not need charity," Rose said automatically. "Good, because I am not offering charity. I am offering lunch to someone I would like to get to know better." His gray eyes held hers, steady and honest. "Will you let me do that?" After a moment, Rose nodded. She was hungry, she realized suddenly, absolutely starving. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered curtains on the windows and the smell of fresh bread in the air. Kieran ordered steak and potatoes for both of them, and coffee that came strong and hot. Rose had not realized how cold she was until she wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "So tell me about yourself," Kieran said, leaning back in his chair. "You said you came here with your husband. Where are you from originally?" "Kansas," Rose replied. "Small town outside of Dodge City. Thomas and I got married when I was 19. He had dreams of starting a ranch out west, and I wanted to support him. We heard there was good land available in New Mexico, so we came out here 3 years ago." "And you were happy?" "Very," Rose said softly. "Thomas was a good man. Kind, hardworking, full of ideas about what we could build together. When he died, it felt like someone had ripped my heart out of my chest, but I could not let the ranch go. It was all I had left of him." Kieran nodded slowly. "I understand that, holding on to what matters. What about you?" Rose asked. "Mr. Henderson said you used to be a Texas Ranger." "That is right. Joined when I was 21, served for 8 years. Saw a lot of hard things, did some hard things. Eventually, I needed a change. Now I work as a hired gun, mostly helping small towns deal with outlaws. It is not glamorous work, but someone has to do it." "Is that why you are here? The Dalton gang?" "Yes. Sheriff Thompson contacted me a few weeks ago, said he was worried they were heading this direction. Seems he was right based on what happened the other day. Those men I shot were Dalton scouts testing the town's defenses." Rose felt a chill run down her spine. "You think they will come back?" "I know they will. Men like that do not scare easily, but we will be ready for them." Their food arrived, and Rose discovered she was ravenous. She ate with more enthusiasm than was probably ladylike, but Kieran did not seem to mind. He ate his own meal at a steady pace, occasionally glancing up at her with what looked like amusement and something warmer. "Can I ask you something?" Kieran said after a while. "Of course." "Why do you do it? Why work yourself to the bone holding on to that ranch? I'm not judging," he added quickly. "I am genuinely curious. Most people in your situation would have sold the land and found an easier path." Rose set down her fork and thought about how to answer. "Because giving up feels like admitting that everything we built, everything Thomas died for, was worthless. And because I am not sure who I would be without that fight. Does that make sense?" "It does," Kieran said quietly. "More than you know." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. Rose found herself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in months. Kieran had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and he told stories from his time as a ranger that were by turns harrowing and absurdly funny. When they finally left the restaurant, the afternoon sun was starting its descent toward the horizon. Rose knew she needed to get back to the ranch, but she found herself reluctant to leave Kieran's company. "Thank you for lunch," she said as they stood on the sidewalk. "I needed that more than I realized." "You are welcome," Kieran replied. "Rose, I know you are used to handling everything on your own, and I respect that. But if you ever need help with anything, I am around. Will you remember that?" She nodded, meeting his eyes. "I will." As she rode home on Bess, Rose could not stop replaying their conversation in her mind. There was something about Kieran that drew her in, made her want to lower the walls she had built around herself. But that scared her too. She had loved once and lost, and the pain had nearly destroyed her. Did she dare risk her heart again? The following Sunday, Rose went to church in town. She was not particularly religious, but she attended occasionally because it was expected, and because it gave her a chance to buy supplies and catch up on town gossip. The service was led by Pastor Williams, a earnest young man who had arrived in Piñon just a few months before. Rose sat near the back, as she usually did, trying to ignore the whispers and sideways glances from some of the other women. She knew what they said about her, that she was improper, stubborn, prideful, that she should remarry quickly instead of trying to run a ranch alone. The judgment stung, but she had learned to hold her head high. Halfway through the service, the door opened and Kieran Quinn walked in. He removed his hat and stood near the back, scanning the room until his eyes found Rose. He smiled slightly and moved to sit in the pew next to her. The whispers increased immediately. Rose felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but also something else. A small thrill of defiance, maybe. Let them talk. Kieran stood beside her during the hymns, his deep voice joining in the singing. Their shoulders almost touched, and Rose was intensely aware of his presence. After the service ended, he walked her outside. "Did not expect to see you in church," Rose said with a slight smile. "I go when I can. Figured it could not hurt to ask for some divine intervention with the Dalton gang." He paused, then added, "Also heard you would be here." Rose's heart skipped. "Oh, Rose, I would like to call on you properly. With your permission, I would like to come to your ranch next Saturday afternoon. Maybe help you with some chores, spend some time talking. Would that be all right?" She should say no. She should protect herself, keep him at arm's length. But instead, she found herself nodding. Yes, that would be all right. The smile that spread across Kieran's face was worth any risk. The week passed with agonizing slowness. Rose found herself watching the calendar, counting down the days until Saturday. She told herself she was being ridiculous, acting like a schoolgirl with her first crush. But she could not help the flutter of anticipation in her chest. On Friday night, she stayed up late to clean the cabin thoroughly, scrubbing floors and washing windows until everything gleamed. She even picked wildflowers from the meadow and put them in a jar on the table. Then she looked at them and felt embarrassed, snatching them away and putting them outside. She did not want to seem too eager. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. Rose dressed carefully in her best day dress, a deep blue cotton that Thomas had bought her for their second anniversary. She brushed her hair until it shone and pinned it up neatly. Then she looked at herself in the small mirror above her wash basin and sighed. No amount of primping could hide the dark circles under her eyes or the weathered look that came from years of outdoor work. Kieran arrived at mid-morning, riding up on his dark horse with a small bundle tied to his saddle. He dismounted and walked toward her with that easy confidence she found so attractive. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. "Good morning," Rose replied, trying to sound casual. "What brings you out this way?" he grinned. "You know exactly what brings me out this way. Now, what needs doing around here?" They spent the morning working together, Kieran helping her repair the chicken coop and replace some rotted boards on the porch. Rose found herself relaxing into his presence, enjoying the easy companionship of working alongside someone. It had been so long since she had not been alone. When lunchtime came, Kieran untied the bundle from his saddle and pulled out a picnic basket. "I stopped by the restaurant and had them pack some food. Thought we could eat lunch together." Rose felt warmth spread through her chest. "That sounds wonderful." They sat on the porch, eating cold chicken and fresh bread, potato salad and apple pie. Kieran poured them both water from his canteen, and they talked about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers. She told him about her childhood in Kansas, helping her mother in the garden and learning to sew. "You miss it?" Kieran asked. "Being the woman you were before, with soft hands and an easier life." Rose looked down at her hands, rough and scarred. She thought about what he had said that first day about how these hands had built character. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but mostly no. I am not proud of how hard things are, but I am proud of who I have become. I know my own strength now in a way I never did before." "Does that sound strange?" "Not at all," Kieran said softly. He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "I think you are remarkable, Rose Newman. I have met a lot of people in my life, but I have never met anyone quite like you." Rose felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back, but one escaped anyway, rolling down her cheek. Kieran reached up with his free hand and gently brushed it away. "Why are you crying?" he asked, his voice tender. "Because you see me," she whispered. "Really see me. Not the struggling widow, not the stubborn woman who will not know her place. You see who I actually am, and you think that is worth something." "You are worth everything," Kieran said, and then he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, sweet and questioning, giving her the chance to pull away if she wanted. But Rose did not want to pull away. She kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her palm. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Kieran rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I did not come out here planning to do that," he murmured. "But I am not sorry I did." "I am not sorry either," Rose said. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, and when Kieran finally had to leave as the sun began to set, he promised to return soon. Rose stood on her porch and watched him ride away, her hand pressed against her lips where she could still feel the ghost of his kiss. Over the next few weeks, Kieran became a regular presence at Rose's ranch. He came whenever he could spare time from his work with the sheriff, helping her with the heavy labor and spending hours just talking with her. They discovered they had similar views on many things, similar dreams for the future. Rose found herself falling for him, truly falling in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. She had not thought she could love again after Thomas, had not wanted to risk that kind of pain. But Kieran was patient and kind, never pushing her faster than she was ready to go. In early November, the situation with the Dalton gang came to a head. Word reached town that they were planning a major robbery of the bank in Piñon. Kieran and Sheriff Thompson organized the townsfolk, setting up defensive positions and preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Rose heard about it when she came into town for supplies. She found Kieran at the sheriff's office, studying a map of the town with several other men. "What can I do to help?" she asked. Kieran looked up, concern flashing across his face. "Rose, I want you to stay at your ranch that day. Keep away from town. It is going to be dangerous. I can shoot," Rose said firmly. "Thomas taught me. I am not going to hide at home while the town fights for its life." "Rose, please." No, she crossed her arms. I have as much stake in this town as anyone. More, maybe. If the bank gets robbed and has to close, I lose my ranch. I am helping. Kieran looked like he wanted to argue more, but Sheriff Thompson cut in. We could use every gun we can get. If Mrs. Newman wants to help, I say we let her. Kieran's jaw tightened, but he nodded reluctantly. Fine. But you stay with me, where I can keep an eye on you. The robbery was planned for the following Tuesday. The tension in town was palpable as everyone prepared. Rose spent Monday night at Kieran's boarding house, not wanting to be alone at the ranch. They sat up talking until late, and Kieran held her hand like he might never let go. Promise me you will be careful tomorrow, Rose said quietly. I promise, Kieran replied. And you promise me the same. I promise. Tuesday morning dawned gray and cold, unusual weather for New Mexico in November. Rose took up her position in the general store, where she had a good view of the street and the bank. She checked her rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready. Her hands were steady, not shaking at all, and she felt a strange sense of calm. Kieran was across the street in the hotel, positioned at a second-floor window. Their eyes met through the glass, and he gave her a small nod. She nodded back. The Dalton gang arrived just after noon, riding hard into town with guns drawn. There were 12 of them, all heavily armed and looking mean. Their leader, a scarred man named Jack Dalton, shouted orders as they surrounded the bank. Sheriff Thompson waited until they were dismounted and distracted, and then he gave the signal. Gunfire erupted from every direction, catching the outlaws by surprise. Several went down immediately, but the others returned fire, taking cover behind water troughs and hitching posts. Rose took careful aim and fired, hitting one man in the shoulder. He spun around and fell, his gun flying from his hand. She reloaded quickly, her training coming back despite her racing heart. The battle seemed to last forever, though it was probably only about 10 minutes. Smoke filled the air, making it hard to see. Rose kept firing when she had a clear shot, trying to ignore the chaos and fear around her. Then she saw Kieran step out into the street, facing Jack Dalton directly. They both had their guns drawn, circling each other like wolves. Rose's heart stopped. She wanted to scream at him to take cover, but she knew he would not listen. The two men fired simultaneously. Jack Dalton fell backward, a hole in his chest, dead before he hit the ground. But Kieran staggered too, his hand going to his side where blood was already spreading across his shirt. No. Rose screamed. She dropped her rifle and ran out into the street, not caring about the danger, not caring about anything except getting to Kieran. He was on his knees now, his face pale. Rose reached him just as he started to fall, catching him and lowering him to the ground. Kieran, stay with me, she begged, pressing her hands against the wound to try to stop the bleeding. Please stay with me. I am okay, he managed to say, though his voice was weak. It is not as bad as it looks. The remaining outlaws were either dead or surrendering now. The doctor came running, pushing Rose gently aside to examine Kieran. She stood there with blood on her hands, watching as they carefully lifted him and carried him to the doctor's office. The hours that followed were the longest of Rose's life. She sat in the waiting room of the doctor's office, still covered in blood, her hands clasped tightly together as she prayed to a God she was not sure she believed in. Please, she thought over and over, please do not take him from me. I cannot lose someone else I love. Finally, the doctor emerged. His expression was tired but not grief-stricken, which Rose took as a good sign. The bullet went clean through, he said. Missed anything vital. He lost some blood and he will be in a fair amount of pain for a while, but he should make a full recovery. Rose felt her knees go weak with relief. Can I see him? Yes, but only for a few minutes. He needs rest. Kieran was lying on a bed in the back room, his torso wrapped in white bandages. His eyes were closed and he looked very pale, but his chest rose and fell with steady breaths. Rose pulled a chair up beside the bed and took his hand carefully, his eyes fluttered open. "Rose, I am here," she whispered. "Did we win?" "Yes, you got Dalton. The rest either surrendered or died. It is over." A small smile crossed his face. "Good." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I was so scared when I saw you run out into the street. Thought my heart would stop." "I had to get to you," Rose said simply. "Kieran, I love you. I know it is soon and maybe I should not say it, but I do. I love you, and the thought of losing you was unbearable." His hand squeezed hers weakly. "I love you too. Have loved you since the day I saw you kneeling by that broken fence, refusing to give up even though you were exhausted. You are the strongest person I know, Rose Newman." Tears streamed down Rose's face, but they were happy tears this time. "When you get better, I want us to talk about the future. Our future." "I would like that," Kieran said softly, and then his eyes closed again as sleep claimed him. Kieran recovered over the next few weeks, staying at the boarding house while the wound healed. Rose visited him every day, bringing him food from her ranch and sitting with him for hours. They talked about everything, making plans and dreaming together. The reward money for the Dalton gang was substantial, split among everyone who had helped in the defense. Rose's share was enough to pay off 3 months of mortgage payments and buy new lumber for the fences. Kieran's share was even larger, as he had been instrumental in the gang's defeat. As December arrived and the weather turned colder, Kieran was finally well enough to leave the boarding house. The day he was released by the doctor, he rode straight to Rose's ranch. She met him on the porch, her face lighting up when she saw him. "You should be resting," she scolded gently. "I have rested enough," Kieran said, dismounting carefully. He walked up to her and took both of her hands in his. "Rose, I have been thinking a lot during my recovery, about what I want from life, where I want to be." "And what did you decide?" "I decided that I am tired of drifting from town to town, living out of a boarding house, risking my life for strangers. I want a home, a family, a future with someone I love." He took a deep breath. "I want all of that with you if you will have me. Rose Newman, will you marry me?" Rose felt joy surge through her, so strong it made her dizzy. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." Kieran pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "I know your ranch is important to you," Kieran said. "We can live here, work it together. I have money saved up and the reward from the gang. We can buy that new lumber, maybe expand the herd, build something real together." "That sounds perfect," Rose whispered. They were married in the Piñon church 3 weeks later, just before Christmas. It was a small ceremony, attended by Sheriff Thompson, the doctor, Pastor Williams, and a handful of townspeople who had come to respect Rose over the years. Rose wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Kieran wore his best suit. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. And as they walked back down the aisle together, Rose felt something she had not felt in years, complete and utter happiness. The first months of their marriage were an adjustment. Rose had been living alone for so long that having someone else in the house felt strange at first. But Kieran was patient and thoughtful, learning her rhythms and routines. He took over many of the heavier tasks around the ranch, but he never made Rose feel like she was incapable or weak. They worked side by side every day, fixing fences and tending cattle, planting a winter garden and repairing the barn. With Kieran's help and the money they now had available, the ranch began to thrive in ways it never had before. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the New Mexico landscape. Kieran would hold Rose's hand, his rough fingers intertwined with hers, and they would talk about their dreams. "I want children," Rose said one evening in February. "At least 2 or 3. I want this ranch to be full of life and laughter." "I want that too," Kieran replied, pulling her close. "I want to build something that lasts, something we can pass down to our children and grandchildren." As winter gave way to spring, Rose discovered she was pregnant. She told Kieran on a warm March evening, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly. The look on Kieran's face was something Rose would treasure forever. Pure, unfiltered joy mixed with awe and a touch of fear. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might break. "I love you so much," he murmured into her hair. "Both of you." The pregnancy was not easy. Rose had moments of terrible sickness in the early months, and she had to slow down on the heavy ranch work. But Kieran was there every step of the way, taking on extra duties and fussing over her in a way that was equal parts endearing and exasperating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Rose would tell him with a laugh when he insisted she rest. "I do not care," Kieran would reply. "You are carrying precious cargo." Their son was born on a crisp November morning in 1879, exactly 1 year after the confrontation with the Dalton gang. The birth was long and difficult, attended by the doctor and 2 midwives from town. Kieran paced outside the bedroom for hours, nearly wearing a path in the floor. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he burst into the room despite protests from the midwives. Rose was lying in bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," she said softly. Kieran approached slowly, almost reverently. He looked down at the baby's small face, the tiny fingers curled into fists, and tears began streaming down his cheeks. "He is perfect," he whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but had never settled on one. Now, looking at her husband holding their child with such tenderness, Rose knew exactly what to call him. "Jacob," she said. "Jacob Thomas Quinn." Thomas for the husband she had lost, who had brought her to this land. And Jacob, a strong name for a boy who would grow up knowing the value of hard work and the strength of family. Life settled into a new rhythm after Jacob's birth. Rose discovered motherhood suited her in unexpected ways. She loved the weight of her son in her arms, the way he looked at her with complete trust. Kieran was a devoted father, taking Jacob with him whenever he could, teaching him about the ranch even though the boy was far too young to understand. The ranch continued to prosper. With careful management and a bit of luck, they were able to expand their cattle herd and purchase the neighboring property when it came up for sale. What had once been a struggling operation became one of the most successful ranches in the area. Rose's hands remained rough from work, scarred and calloused as they had been the day Kieran first took them in his. But now when she looked at them, she saw not just evidence of struggle but proof of triumph. These hands had held on when everything seemed impossible. These hands had built a life worth living. 2 years after Jacob was born, Rose gave birth to twin daughters, whom they named Sarah and Emma. The cabin suddenly felt very small with 3 young children running around, so Kieran began building an addition. He worked on it every spare moment, determined to give his family the space they needed. One evening, as they stood looking at the nearly completed addition, Rose leaned against her husband's shoulder. "You remember the day we met?" she asked. "Of course." "You were behind the counter of Henderson's store, covered in glass from that broken window. Looked fierce and scared at the same time. I remember you coming to my ranch later, helping me fix that fence. Do you remember what you said about my hands?" Kieran smiled. "I said those hands built character strong. And I meant it." Rose held up her hands, studying them in the fading light. They were still rough, still scarred, but now they wore a wedding ring. These hands had held her babies, had worked alongside her husband to build something lasting. "I used to be ashamed of them," she admitted. "These hands that were not soft and pretty anymore, but you taught me to see them differently. You taught me that strength is beautiful." Kieran took her hands in his, pressing kisses to her knuckles. "Everything about you is beautiful, Rose. But especially your strength." The years continued to pass in a blur of hard work and happiness. Jacob grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with his father on the ranch. Sarah was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees and getting into mischief. Emma was gentle and artistic, spending hours drawing pictures of the horses and cattle. When Jacob was 7, Rose gave birth to another son, whom they named Michael. The boy had Kieran's gray eyes and Rose's stubborn determination, a combination that promised interesting times ahead. The ranch had grown large enough that they needed to hire help. They brought on 2 ranch hands, young men who worked hard and learned from Kieran's expertise. Rose took pride in what they had built together, this thriving operation that had once been a struggling plot of land she could barely maintain. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Rose would think about her first husband, Thomas. The grief had faded over the years, transformed into a gentle melancholy and gratitude for the time they had shared. He had brought her to New Mexico, had shown her the land that would become her home. In a way, everything she had now was built on the foundation he had laid. She mentioned this to Kieran once, worried he might be hurt by her memories of Thomas, but he had simply pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "He was part of your story," Kieran said. "Part of what made you who you are. I am not threatened by that. I am grateful for every experience that shaped you into the woman I fell in love with." That was Kieran, Rose thought. Always understanding, always seeing to the heart of things. In the summer of 1887, when Jacob was nearly 8 and the twins were 6, a drought hit New Mexico hard. The grass dried up, the creek that ran through their property slowed to a trickle, and the cattle grew thin. It was a difficult time, reminding Rose of those early days when she had struggled alone. But this time, she was not alone. She and Kieran worked together to get the cattle through, hauling water from the well and rationing feed carefully. Their ranch hands worked tirelessly, and even the children helped where they could. It was exhausting and stressful, but they made it through with minimal losses. When the rains finally came in September, Rose stood in the doorway of their expanded home and watched the water pour from the sky. Kieran came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We made it," he said. "We did," Rose agreed. "Together." That word, together, had come to define their life. They faced every challenge as a team, celebrated every victory as partners. Rose had learned that asking for help was not weakness but wisdom, and Kieran had learned that loving someone meant respecting their strength, not trying to diminish it. As their children grew older, Rose and Kieran began to plan for the future. They wanted Jacob to take over the ranch someday if that was what he wanted, but they also encouraged all their children to pursue education and their own dreams. Sarah talked about becoming a teacher, while Emma wanted to study art. Michael was still too young to know what he wanted, but he showed signs of having his father's skill with horses. In 1890, the New Mexico Territory finally seemed to be settling into something resembling civilization. Towns were growing, schools were being established, and the lawlessness that had once characterized the region was fading. Kieran officially retired from his work as a hired gun, content to focus entirely on the ranch and his family. That same year, Rose received a letter that changed everything. "Mr. Worthington, The bank manager who had once threatened her with foreclosure had died and left her a letter to be delivered after his death. In it, he apologized for his harsh treatment of her, admitting that he had been wrong to doubt her ability to maintain the ranch. He wrote that she had been an inspiration to him, showing courage and determination that had changed his perspective on what women were capable of achieving. Rose read the letter several times, emotions swirling through her. Anger at the way he had treated her, sadness that he had waited until death to apologize, but also a strange sense of validation. She had proven everyone wrong, had succeeded despite the doubts and obstacles. She showed the letter to Kieran, who read it and then pulled her into his arms. "You did not need his approval," Kieran said softly, "but I am glad he finally saw what I have always known. You are extraordinary, Rose Quinn." As the 19th century drew to a close, Rose often found herself reflecting on the journey of her life. She had come to New Mexico as a young bride full of dreams. She had lost her first husband and nearly lost everything else. She had worked until her hands were rough and her body ached, had fought against failure with every ounce of strength she possessed. And then Kieran had come into her life, seeing beauty in her roughness, strength in her scars. He had loved her not despite her hard edges but because of them. Together, they had built something magnificent. On a warm evening in May 1895, Rose and Kieran sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had countless times before. Their children were scattered around the property, Jacob checking on the cattle with the ranch hands, the twins helping their younger brother with his homework in the house. "You ever regret it?" Rose asked suddenly. "Settling down here, giving up the excitement of your old life?" Kieran turned to look at her, genuine surprise on his face. "Regret it? Rose, this is the best decision I ever made. Marrying you, building this life, raising our children. This is everything I never knew I wanted." He took her hand, as he had so many times over the years, and studied it in the golden light of the setting sun. The rough skin, the calluses, the scars that told the story of hard work and perseverance. "These hands," he said softly, tracing the lines on her palm, "they built our entire life. Our home, our family, our future. When I look at your hands, I see everything that matters." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. After 16 years of marriage, he could still make her cry with his words. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. Always have, always will." The years continued to pass in their steady rhythm. Jacob did indeed take over much of the ranch operation as he grew into manhood, proving himself to be as capable and hardworking as his parents. Sarah became a teacher in the Piñon school, beloved by her students for her patience and creativity. Emma moved to Santa Fe to pursue her art, sending home paintings that Rose displayed proudly throughout their home. And Michael, true to early signs, became a renowned horse trainer, people coming from all over the territory to have him work with their animals. In 1900, when Rose was 41 and Kieran was 44, they became grandparents for the first time. Jacob married a sweet woman named Catherine from a neighboring ranch, and they had a daughter they named Rose after her grandmother. Holding that tiny baby, seeing her own name carried forward to another generation, Rose felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. As she rocked little Rose to sleep while Catherine recovered from the birth, Kieran stood in the doorway watching them. Rose looked up and smiled at him, this man who had been her partner, her lover, her best friend for over 20 years. "Come here," she said softly. Kieran crossed the room and sat beside her, looking down at his first grandchild with wonder. "She has your nose," he said. "Poor thing," Rose replied with a laugh. "No, she is beautiful, just like her grandmother." They sat together in comfortable silence, the weight of the sleeping baby a reminder of everything they had built together. This child would grow up on this ranch, would learn to ride horses and tend cattle, would hear stories about her grandmother who had fought against impossible odds to keep the land. In 1908, New Mexico was still a territory, but statehood seemed increasingly likely. The wild days of the Old West were truly over now, replaced by modern conveniences like the railroad and telegraph lines. The ranch had grown to over 1,000 acres, employing a dozen people and maintaining several hundred head of cattle. Rose was nearly 50 now, her hair showing threads of silver, her face lined with the years of sun and wind. But she was still strong, still capable of a full day's work when needed. And Kieran, now 51, remained devoted to her as ever. One evening in late October, they took a ride together up to the high pasture where they had first kissed all those years ago. The autumn air was crisp and clear, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple as the sun set. They dismounted and stood together, looking out over the land they had built together. From this vantage point, they could see the entire ranch spread out before them, the house and barns, the pastures and corrals, the cattle grazing peacefully. "Do you remember that first day you came to help me with the fence?" Rose asked. "I was so determined to send you away to prove I did not need help." "I remember. You were stubborn as a mule." Kieran grinned at her. "Still are." Rose laughed and punched his arm lightly. "And you were insufferably confident, thought you could just swagger in and solve all my problems." "Did I solve them, though?" "Some of them," Rose admitted. "The ones that needed solving. The rest you helped me solve myself, which was better." Kieran pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind so they could both look out over the ranch. "You know what I think about when I see all this?" "What?" "I think about a woman kneeling by a broken fence with hands rough from endless work, refusing to give up even though she was exhausted and scared and facing impossible odds. I think about how those hands built all of this, built character strong enough to weather anything life threw at them. I think about how lucky I am that you let me be part of your story." Rose turned in his arms to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Kieran Quinn, you are not just part of my story, you are my story. Everything good in my life, everything worth having, either existed before you came or was built after you arrived. You did not just help me save the ranch, you helped me save myself." He kissed her then, deep and sweet, and Rose felt the same spark she had felt the first time their lips had met over 20 years ago. Some things never faded, she thought. Some love only grew stronger with time. As they rode back down to the ranch house in the gathering darkness, Rose thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The grief and struggle, the moments when she had wanted to give up but had pushed through anyway. The day a cowboy had looked at her rough hands and seen beauty instead of failure. The life they had built together, stone by stone, day by day. Her hands were still rough from work. They probably always would be. But now when she looked at them, she saw her wedding ring gleaming in the light. She saw the evidence of babies held and horses trained, of gardens planted and fences mended. She saw the physical proof of a life well lived. These hands had built character strong, and with Kieran by her side, they had built so much more. They had built a home, a family, a legacy that would endure for generations. They had built a love story that would be told and retold by their descendants, a testament to the power of perseverance and partnership. As they reached the ranch house, light spilling from the windows where their family waited, Rose felt nothing but gratitude for the struggles that had made her strong, for the cowboy who had seen her strength and loved her for it, for the life they had created together in the wild and beautiful landscape of New Mexico. The years continued their steady march. Rose and Kieran grew older together, their faces weathered by time and sun. their bodies moving a bit slower but their spirits remaining strong. They watched their children grow and thrive, watched their grandchildren multiply. Jacob and Catherine had 3 children in total, 2 boys and a girl. Sarah married a fellow teacher and had twin boys. Emma married an artist she met in Santa Fe and they had 1 daughter. Michael married late, at 32, to a woman who shared his love of horses, and they had 4 children who all seemed to have inherited their father's gift with animals. In 1912, New Mexico finally achieved statehood, becoming the 47th state in the Union. Rose and Kieran traveled to Santa Fe for the celebration, proud to witness this milestone in the history of the land they loved. At the celebration, several people approached Rose to tell her how her story had inspired them. She had become something of a legend in the region, the widow who had refused to give up her ranch and had built it into one of the most successful operations in the state. Rose was gracious with these admirers, but she always gave credit to Kieran. "I could not have done it without my husband," she would say. "He believed in me when I could barely believe in myself." And Kieran, standing beside her, would smile and squeeze her hand, and everyone could see the deep love that still existed between them after more than 30 years of marriage. In 1915, when Rose was 56 and Kieran was 59, they decided to step back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Jacob had been essentially running things for years anyway, and they wanted to spend their remaining years enjoying the life they had built rather than working themselves into the ground. They did not stop working entirely. Rose maintained a large garden and helped care for her grandchildren whenever they visited. Kieran spent his days training horses and tinkering with machinery, never one to sit idle. But the pressure was off, the constant struggle for survival replaced by comfortable routine. They took a trip together that year, their first real vacation. They traveled by train to California, seeing the ocean for the first time. Rose stood on the beach with the waves lapping at her feet, Kieran's arm around her waist, and marveled at how far she had come from that desperate widow struggling to fix a broken fence. "What are you thinking?" Kieran asked. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," Rose replied, "for all of it. The hard times and the good times, the struggles and the triumphs. It all brought me here to this moment with you. No regrets, not a single one." They returned to New Mexico rejuvenated, ready to enjoy this new phase of their life together. Their home became a gathering place for the extended family, especially on holidays. Christmas at the Quinn Ranch was legendary, with sometimes 30 people gathered around tables laden with food, children running everywhere, laughter and love filling every corner. During one such gathering in December 1918, as the family celebrated Christmas together, Rose found herself watching it all from the kitchen doorway. 4 generations of family were represented now, from her own mother who had come from Kansas to live with them in her old age, down to the newest great-grandchild, just 6 months old. Kieran came up beside her, following her gaze. "What are you thinking about?" "About how all of this started with a broken fence and a stubborn woman who would not give up," Rose said softly. "And a cowboy who fell in love with that stubborn woman the moment he saw her," Kieran added. Rose turned to him, studying the face she knew better than her own. The gray hair, the lines around his eyes, the slight stoop in his shoulders that came with age. He was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "Kieran Quinn, I have loved you for 38 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. And I love you, Rose Quinn. Your strength, your determination, your beautiful rough hands that built our entire world." He took those hands in his, just as he had done so many times over the decades. Her hands were even more worn now, marked by age as well as work. But they were still strong, still capable. These hands built character strong, Kieran said, repeating the words he had first spoken so long ago. And they built a life worth living. In 1920, as Rose approached her 61st birthday, she received word that the ranch had been selected to be featured in a book about successful agricultural operations in New Mexico. A writer came from Santa Fe to interview her and Kieran, asking them about their history and how they had built such a thriving operation. Rose told the story honestly, not glossing over the difficult parts. She talked about losing Thomas, about the struggle to survive, about the moments when she had wanted to give up. And then she talked about the day a cowboy had come to help her fix a fence and had changed everything. "What would you say is the secret to your success?" the writer asked. Rose thought for a moment, then held up her hands. "These," she said. "These hands that learn to work hard and never give up. But more than that, finding a partner who valued those hands, who saw strength instead of failure. Success is not just about hard work, though that is important. It is about having someone who believes in you, who stands beside you when things get tough." She looked at Kieran, who was sitting beside her with his hand over hers. "I was strong before I met my husband, but together we were unstoppable." The book was published in 1921, and Rose was both embarrassed and pleased to see her story in print. Young women from across the state wrote to her, saying she had inspired them to pursue their own dreams and not let obstacles stop them. Rose answered every letter, encouraging them to believe in themselves and never give up. The 1920s brought significant changes to New Mexico. The automobile became common, paved roads began to replace dirt tracks, and modern conveniences like electricity and indoor plumbing made their way even to rural areas. The ranch adapted to these changes, always looking for ways to improve operations while maintaining the core values that had made it successful. Rose and Kieran celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in December 1919, surrounded by their ever-growing family. It was a joyous occasion, with people traveling from all over the state to honor the couple who had become legendary in the region. During the celebration, Jacob stood up to give a toast. "My parents taught me many things," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room. "They taught me the value of hard work, the importance of family, the strength that comes from never giving up. But most importantly, they taught me what real love looks like. Not the easy love of good times, but the enduring love that weathers storms and grows stronger with each challenge overcome." To Rose and Kieran Quinn, the finest people I have ever known. Rose wiped tears from her eyes as everyone raised their glasses. She looked around at the faces of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, at the friends and neighbors who had become like family. This was what she and Kieran had built together. Not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love and strength that would continue long after they were gone. As the 1920s progressed, Rose began to slow down more noticeably. Her joints ached on cold mornings, and she tired more easily. But her spirit remained strong, and she still spent every day doing something productive. She particularly enjoyed teaching her granddaughters to sew and cook, passing down the skills her own mother had taught her. Kieran, too, showed his age. He had to give up horse training after a fall in 1925, left him with a badly broken arm that never quite healed right. But he was content to sit on the porch and watch the younger generations work, offering advice when asked and telling stories about the old days. They were sitting on that porch together on a warm evening in September 1927 when Rose suddenly asked, "Do you remember the exact moment you knew you loved me?" Kieran smiled, his eyes distant with memory. "I do. It was that first day when I held your hands and saw how rough they were from all your work. Most men would have seen failure in those hands, but I saw courage and determination and strength. I saw a woman who refused to be beaten by life, and I thought to myself, I want to know this woman. I want to be part of her story. That was the beginning of love, I think. It grew from there until I could not imagine my life without you in it. I knew I loved you the day you got shot, Rose said softly. When I saw you fall and thought I might lose you, the pain was so sharp, so immediate. And I knew that you had become essential to me, that my heart belonged to you completely. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the New Mexico sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. After 50 years in this land, Rose still found its beauty breathtaking. No regrets. Kieran asked, echoing a question he had posed many times over the years. Not a single one, Rose replied, as she always did. You. Only that I did not meet you sooner. He squeezed her hand gently. But we have had a good run, you and I. The best, Rose agreed. In early 1930, Kieran suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed on his left side. It was a devastating blow, robbing him of much of his independence. But Rose was there every day, helping him with therapy, encouraging him to keep fighting. She had not given up when her first husband died and the ranch nearly failed. She certainly would not give up on Kieran now. You told me once that my hands built character strong, she reminded him during one particularly difficult therapy session. Well, your hands built it right alongside mine. And we are not done yet. You are going to recover from this, Kieran Quinn. I will not accept any other outcome. Her determination seemed to give him strength. Over the following months, Kieran slowly regained some of his mobility. He would never be what he was before the stroke, but he could walk with a cane and use his left hand for simple tasks. It was enough. On a crisp December morning in 1932, Rose and Kieran celebrated their 53rd wedding anniversary. The family gathered as always, though it was a smaller group now. Some of the older generation had passed on, and some of the younger ones lived too far away to make the trip. But there was still plenty of love and laughter to fill the house. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Rose and Kieran found themselves alone on the porch one more time. They bundled in blankets against the cold, sitting close together as they had for so many years. 53 years, Rose mused. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday we met. Other times it feels like we have always been together. I know what you mean, Kieran said. His speech was still slightly slurred from the stroke, but Rose had learned to understand him perfectly. Best 53 years of my life. Mine too. She took his hand, the one that still worked well, and held it gently. Both of their hands were marked by age now, spotted and wrinkled, the veins prominent beneath papery skin. But they were still their hands, still told the story of their lives together. Your hands are still beautiful, Kieran said softly, reading her thoughts as he so often did. Still strong, just like you. Rose smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. We built something good, did we not? We built something magnificent. They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, filling the vast New Mexico sky with their light. And Rose felt nothing but peace. Peace and gratitude for the life she had lived, the love she had found, the family she and Kieran had created together. The years that followed were gentle ones. Rose and Kieran spent their days quietly, enjoying simple pleasures like sitting in the sun, visiting with their grandchildren, and reminiscing about the past. They were both in their 70s now, slowing down significantly but still sharp in mind and spirit. In the spring of 1936, Rose fell ill with pneumonia. At 77, her body struggled to fight off the infection. The doctor did what he could, but he warned the family to prepare for the worst. Kieran refused to leave her side. He sat in a chair next to her bed day and night, holding her hand and talking to her even when she was too weak to respond. He told her stories about their life together, reminded her of all the moments they had shared. "Remember the day we met," he would say. "You were the most beautiful, frightening woman I had ever seen. I knew immediately that you were going to change my life." Or, "Remember when Jacob was born, how scared we both were. But you were so strong, Rose. You have always been the strongest person I know." After a week of fighting, Rose's fever finally broke. She opened her eyes to find Kieran slumped in the chair beside her, still holding her hand even in sleep. Love welled up in her chest so strongly it hurt. "Kieran," she whispered. He woke immediately, his eyes focusing on her face. "Rose." "Oh, thank God, I thought I might lose you." "You are not getting rid of me that easily," she said with a weak smile. "We still have more time together." And they did. Rose recovered slowly but surely, regaining her strength over the following months. By summer, she was up and moving around again, still frail but determined. They celebrated her recovery with a big family dinner, everyone grateful that they had been given more time with the matriarch of the family. In August 1938, as Rose approached her 80th birthday, the family planned a huge celebration. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted an entire weekend. There was food and music, stories and laughter. People came from as far away as California to honor Rose and Kieran, to thank them for the legacy they had created. On the evening of her actual birthday, as the party wound down, Rose found herself once again on the porch with Kieran. It had become their place over the years, the spot where they had shared so many conversations and quiet moments. 80 years old, Rose said wonderingly. "When I was a young girl in Kansas, I never imagined I would live so long or see so much." "You have lived enough for 3 lifetimes," Kieran said. He was 82 now, moving slowly but still present, still sharp. "And loved enough for 100. Rose turned to him, taking in every detail of his beloved face. "I want you to know something, Kieran. In case I have never said it clearly enough. You saved me. Not from poverty or failure, though you helped with that too. You saved me from becoming hard and bitter. You reminded me that I was still worthy of love, still capable of joy. You saw beauty in my rough hands when I only saw ugliness. You gave me back my life." Kieran's eyes grew moist. "Rose, you saved me too. I was drifting before I met you, going from town to town with no real purpose beyond the next job. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to build instead of just survive. We saved each other." They kissed then, soft and sweet, and it was just like the first time and somehow better because of all the years between. This was what love looked like after 60 years together. Not the wild passion of youth, though there was still passion, but rather a deep, abiding certainty. A knowing that spanned decades and circumstances. A bond that death itself would struggle to break. As autumn arrived in 1939, both Rose and Kieran knew their time was growing short. They had lived long, full lives, but no one lived forever. They talked about death openly, planning their wishes and making sure their children knew what they wanted. "I want to be buried on the hill overlooking the ranch," Rose said one evening. "The place where you first kissed me. I want to be able to see everything we built, even after I am gone." "That is a good spot," Kieran agreed. "I want to be buried there too, right beside you. We have been side by side for 60 years. I see no reason to change that now." In November of 1939, Kieran suffered another stroke, this one more severe than the first. He lingered for a few days, drifting in and out of consciousness. Rose sat beside him constantly, holding his hand and talking to him, just as he had done for her when she was sick. "You have been the love of my life," she told him during one of his lucid moments. My partner, my best friend, my everything. I will miss you every day for whatever time I have left, but I am grateful, so grateful for all the years we had together. Kieran squeezed her hand weakly. Love you, he managed to say. Always. Always, Rose echoed. He died peacefully that evening, with Rose holding his hand and their children gathered around. He was 83 years old, and he had lived to see his family grow to include 4 children, 12 grandchildren, 31 great-grandchildren, and 6 great-great-grandchildren. It was a legacy any man would be proud of. Rose grieved deeply, but she did not fall apart as she had when Thomas died. She had Kieran for 60 years, and those years had been everything she could have hoped for. The grief was painful, but it was also a testament to how deeply she had loved and been loved in return. True to their wishes, Kieran was buried on the hill overlooking the ranch. The entire family gathered for the funeral, along with friends and neighbors from across the state. The preacher spoke about a life well lived, a man who had served his community and loved his family with everything he had. After everyone else had left, Rose stood alone at the grave. She placed her hand on the headstone, feeling the rough granite beneath her palm. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. For seeing beauty in my rough hands, for loving me with all your heart, for building this life with me. I will see you again, my love. I promise. Rose lived for another 2 years after Kieran's death. She was frail now, moving slowly and sleeping much of the day. But she still enjoyed visits from her family, still smiled when her great-great-grandchildren climbed onto her lap to hear stories about the old days. She told them about coming to New Mexico as a young bride, about losing her first husband and fighting to keep the ranch. She told them about the day a handsome cowboy had helped her fix a fence and changed her life forever. She showed them her hands, still rough and scarred even at 82, and told them that these hands had built everything they saw around them. Never be ashamed of honest work, she would tell them. Never apologize for being strong. Your hands might get rough, your back might ache, but you will know that you earned everything you have, and that is worth more than anything. On a warm evening in May 1942, Rose sat on the porch alone, wrapped in a blanket and watching the sunset. The ranch spread out before her, prosperous and thriving, managed now by her grandson, Jacob's eldest son, with the same care and dedication she and Kieran had shown. She could feel her heart laboring, each beat requiring effort. She knew, with the certainty of someone who had lived a long time, that this would be her last sunset, and that was all right. She had lived 83 years, had loved deeply twice, had raised children and built a legacy that would endure for generations. As the sun touched the horizon, Rose closed her eyes and pictured Kieran standing on the hill where he was buried, waiting for her with that smile she loved so much. She could almost feel his hand reaching for hers, could almost hear him saying the words he had spoken so many times. These hands built character strong. Rose smiled and took one last breath. And then she was gone peacefully, surrounded by the land she had fought so hard to keep and the legacy she and Kieran had built together. She was buried beside Kieran on the hill, just as they had planned. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, all coming to pay their respects to a woman who had become a legend in New Mexico. She was remembered not just as a successful rancher, but as a symbol of perseverance and strength. In the years that followed, the story of Rose and Kieran Quinn was told and retold. It became part of the folklore of New Mexico, the tale of a widow who refused to give up and the cowboy who fell in love with her strength. Their descendants continued to run the ranch successfully, always remembering the values that Rose and Kieran had instilled: hard work, determination, family, and above all, love. The house they had built and expanded over the years remained standing, carefully maintained by each generation. The porch where they had spent so many evenings became something of a shrine, a place where family members would sit and remember the two people who had started it all. On the wall inside the house hung a painting that Emma had done of her parents in their middle years. It showed them standing side by side, holding hands, with the ranch spread out behind them. Rose's hands in the painting were rough and scarred, but the way Kieran held them made them look beautiful. It was a perfect capturing of their relationship, and it became one of the family's most treasured possessions. Decades later, when New Mexico celebrated its centennial as a state in 2012, Rose and Kieran Quinn were featured in a historical exhibit about pioneering families who had shaped the state. Their story was told in plaques and photographs, and visitors could read Rose's own words from the book published in 1921. Young people, especially young women, were particularly drawn to Rose's story. They saw in her a model for their own lives, proof that strength and femininity were not contradictory, that rough hands could be beautiful, that love and independence could coexist. The ranch itself, though no longer owned by the Quinn family, it had been sold to a conservation trust in the 1990s with the family's blessing, was preserved as a working historical site. Visitors could tour the house and barns, learn about ranching in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and hear the story of Rose and Kieran. And on the hill overlooking it all, two headstones stood side by side. The inscriptions were simple: Rose Newman, Quinn, 1856, 1942. Her hands built character strong, Kieran Matthew Quinn, 1857, 1939. He loved her strength. It was a fitting memorial to a love that had endured everything life threw at it, a partnership that had transformed a struggling piece of land into a thriving legacy, and a story that continued to inspire people more than a century after it began. Because in the end, Rose and Kieran's story was not just about surviving in the harsh landscape of the Old West. It was not just about building a successful ranch or raising a family. It was about finding someone who saw your true worth, who valued your strength instead of being threatened by it, who loved you not despite your rough edges but because of them. It was about two people who had come together and built something magnificent, not just with wood and wire and sweat, but with love and respect and unwavering commitment to each other. They had faced every challenge as partners, celebrated every victory together, and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Their hands, both pairs rough from endless work, had indeed built character strong. But more than that, they had built a love story for the ages.